Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
In summer 1999, a bunch of friends and I decided that we should all go camping for a weekend on the west coast of Ireland. I can't now remember who suggested it or why, but it seemed like a great idea. Earlier in the summer, I'd gone on a camping holiday with a different group of friends to France, and it had been thoroughly enjoyable. As the selected weekend in early August drew closer, excuses started to come in for most of the group, with the result that only 4 of us actually met up one Friday evening to drive down from the greater Belfast area. There were 3 girls and myself, all of whom I knew pretty well, so it didn't seem that weird, who I'll call Anne, Becca, and Claire for the purposes of this account. I was close friends with Becca and Claire's younger brothers, who were the same age as me, and we did a lot of activities together as a group. Although I hadn't spent as much time with Anne before, who was a bit older again, maybe 25, we were on friendly enough terms. The plan, such as it was, consisted of driving down to Limerick that Friday evening and staying overnight with a university friend of Anne's, then drive up towards Galway on Saturday morning, find somewhere to pitch our tents, and stay there for 2 nights before coming home on Monday afternoon, in time for me to work my shift at 5 p.m. So we probably left not long after 7 p.m., working on the assumption that it would take us about 5 hours in total to travel down to Dublin and then trek across the Irish Midlands to arrive at Anne's friend's place just outside Limerick around midnight. Although there were only the 4 of us plus all our camping gear, we opted to take 2 cars down, my car and Becca's. In hindsight, I think the group was a bit hesitant about my car, which was very old. Becca drove a nearly new Nissan and Claire accompanied her while Anne traveled with me. The drive down was fairly uneventful, along mostly rural roads. This was long before the current motorways and bypasses had been built between Belfast and Dublin, and so we passed through towns and villages like Castlebillingham and Drogheda as the sun set over the Wicklow Hills. We arrived at the friend's house well after midnight, as I recall, and bunked down for the night in our sleeping bags on the living room floor. The next morning we drove northwest onto the coast road, on through the desolate landscape of the Burren. The weather was kinda nondescript, overcast, slightly misty, not very warm. We stopped for a while at the cliffs of Moher and took some photos, before continuing on to Galway City. It was now mid-afternoon, and we still had no clear idea of where we'd spend the night. We'd been pretty sure that in a touristy area like Galway we'd easily find a backpacker campsite somewhere, but we hadn't seen anything on the way in. This was before mobile phones or easy internet access, but rather than go and find a tourist information office, we optimistically decided to press on and try the road running west away from the city alongside the northern shore of Galway Bay. We found several caravan sites just past Salthill, but they were mostly holiday parks for static caravans, and the site wardens told us they'd know where to pitch tents. After trying a few of these sites with no success, we realized they really just didn't want a group of teenagers getting up to all sorts on a site which mainly seemed to cater for families and retirees. So we were a bit stuck. We stopped again at a petrol station not far past the village of Spittle, now about 10 miles out from Galway City, and had a bit of a conference. It was suggested that maybe we should just drive home. We didn't have a lot of money, so even renting rooms at a cheap hotel or guest house was beyond our means, if we could even find a place willing to take a guy and 3 girls, and anyway, it kind of defeated the point of coming all this way. We wanted fresh air and open spaces, not pink frilly cushion slips, a 10 p.m. curfew and a lingering smell of cabbage. We could have stayed at home if we'd wanted that. But we had noticed that there were a few signs along the main road pointing down small side roads to the beach. Well, maybe wild camping was the solution. We set off again back the way we'd come, and at random I selected one of these signposted side roads and pulled in. I bumped along a single-track road for about a quarter of a mile, with Becca following in her car. There were a few houses on either side of the road at first, but after that there were only rough fields and drystone walls. The road finished at a small car park, turning circle, surrounded by partially grass-covered sand dunes and with a pathway running down to the beach beyond. There were a couple of other cars parked, and there was also an official-looking sign saying no camping, but we could see a blackened ring of stones up on the grass verge, which was plainly used for campfires. We decided to go ahead and change it. We set both tents up, a red and navy 3-man dome tent for me, and a yellow and gray ridge tent for the girls, and then hammered in a windbreak around the ad hoc campfire area to claim the territory, kind of. We then went back up the road to the petrol station we'd stopped at earlier, which had quite a large general store attached to it and, importantly, customer toilets. We bought some provisions, including a couple of cans of hot dogs and some rolls for dinner, plus a fire log and some wood fuel to build a campfire once it got dark. By the time we got back, the other cars had gone and we now had the whole place to ourselves. It took a while to get everything out and light the Coleman stove, as there was a fairly cool sea breeze coming in over the dunes. Although it was early August, we had to put coats and sweatshirts on as it really wasn't all that warm. But by the time darkness fell, we had dinner cooking, and all was good. We could hear the waves lapping against the rocks by the shore, and could just about make out the lights on the far side of the bay, as well as the lights of Galway city brightening the sky to the east. From time to time a car would come down the narrow road and arrive into the turning circle, but then just keep going and drive back the way it had come in. We assumed they were just kids like us, looking for somewhere to park up on a Saturday night. We were slightly on the alert each time we saw headlights approaching in case it was the police coming to move us on, but it was fine. Eventually, we ran out of things to talk about, and we were getting pretty tired after another long day. Around 11 p.m. we started to pack away the cool box and the camp stove, and allowed the fire to burn down a little. It was dark, but not pitch black. I don't specifically remember there being a moon visible, but there was enough ambient visibility to move around and see things. Now, I'd been content with the original proposal for me to sleep in my own tent, and the 3 girls to sleep in theirs, which was slightly larger. But for some reason Claire had started feeling a bit anxious, and said she would feel safer if we all slept together in the one tent. I felt slightly awkward at this arrangement, but since the others seemed okay with it, and we'd spent the previous night sleeping in the same room anyway, I couldn't really see the harm in it. So by about 11:30 we'd packed everything away into the cars and tents, and I'd gone into my own tent to get myself dressed for bed. When Claire called across that they were all ready to bed down, I crossed over to the girls' tent with my sleeping bag and my maglite torch, and squeezed in beside them. I was at the front of the tent, nearest the door. There was some more chatter for a while, before we turned the lamps out and tried to get to sleep. The sandy ground was lumpy under the ground sheet, and it wasn't easy to get comfortable. Even though I was tired, I couldn't really sleep, and I didn't want to disturb the others by moving around in my sleeping bag. We heard at least one more car approach, turn, and leave again, but otherwise everything was pretty quiet. Maybe about an hour after we'd turned out the lights, I heard another car coming down the laneway to the beach. This time, though, we heard it drive past the tents and stop, then the engine shut off. Again, this didn't bother me unduly, but the others had also woken at the sound. We lay there for a while, waiting for it to leave, but it didn't. Claire was becoming increasingly worried at this point, whispering that the car was really bothering her. So I offered to go and check it out, just to put her mind at ease. I climbed out of my sleeping bag, slowly unzipped the door a little, and wriggled out through the gap, bringing my torch with me but keeping it switched off. Once I was through the door in the tent's outer porch, I couldn't quite see the car that had just arrived, as my own car was parked in the way. I crawled on my hands and knees over to my car and peered around the front wing. About 30 feet away, I could see a white Volkswagen Golf parked up, its nose facing one of the dunes, with the beach and sea beyond. From my position, I was looking straight onto the passenger side. I could make out the shadow of the car's driver in the cabin, but they seemed to be alone in the car. Well, nothing much to cause concern then, just some guy in a car who'd come down to sit by the beach. Around this time, I often might have gone out in the evening by myself to drive around aimlessly for a few hours, often ending up near the sea, just listening to music and getting lost in my own thoughts, so I could relate. Although, I couldn't hear any music coming from the Volkswagen. I crouched there beside my car's front wing for another minute or so, waiting to see if the Volkswagen was going to stay put or drive off. I just decided that the driver was going to be staying for a while, so I should go back to the tent and tell the others that everything was fine, when there was a sudden pulse of blue light from the Volkswagen's cabin. I could see a pinpoint of light in the back of the car, just behind the driver's seat. It was small, like an LED, but gave out quite a lot of light. And it appeared to be moving, slowly, towards the very back of the car. Like it was drifting around the perimeter of the car's interior, in a clockwise motion. As the light swept slowly over to the side nearest me, it cut in and out of my sight as it dipped below the line of the car's windows and then rose up again, like it was on a slightly erratic trajectory. I'd never seen anything like it. It wasn't some sort of fancy light-up car accessory, like an LED rope light. It truly appeared to be a self-propelled light source, moving slowly like a bright blue firefly around the inside of the Volkswagen. And I was pretty sure it wasn't a firefly or any other insect trapped inside the car. I'm familiar with fireflies, but this was far, far brighter and intense, synthetic blue, enough to light up the car's interior. I've never seen a firefly in Ireland, either. I stayed hidden behind the wing of my car, watching this light, trying to work it out. There was no sound, just a light. It continued to move round towards the front seat area, briefly hidden by the door pillar as it went. And, as it continued its circuit and began to move along the space between the dashboard and the base of the front windscreen, it lit up the driver for the first time. And that was when my heart leapt into my mouth. Because the face of the driver wasn't human. Not even slightly. It's still hard to describe, all these years later. There was a sense of hollowness, like what I was looking at was a shell, nothing more. The face appeared to be looking straight ahead, toward the sand dune and on out across the water. I could see an eye socket, large and deep, but no actual eye in it. There was a nose, kind of long and hooked, and a mouth that was more like a jagged scar. Its chin was long and pointed, and also hooked forward. But the proportions were all wrong, the distances from one feature to another didn't match actual human dimensions. I didn't know what I was even looking at. I couldn't see an ear at the side, nor could I discern any hair. Although possibly the figure in the driver's seat was wearing a hat or cap of some description. But there was this feeling of total wrongness that swept over me. And not just that what I was looking at was wrong, but that I was wrong to be there. I shouldn't be witnessing this. I wanted to look away. I wanted to run away. But, cliché though it is, I felt rooted to the spot. Not held by some sort of external force or anything, I just couldn't seem to get my thoughts in order to issue clear instructions to my legs. So I kept watching, still hidden, still clutching my unlit mag light. The blue light moved on round, out of sight as it was blocked by the body of the driver, before reappearing once again in the back of the car, repeating its clockwise circle, and still moving up and down ever so slightly as it went. It seemed to have a mind of its own. Thinking back, I'm reminded of the small alien robot creatures in the film Batteries Not Included, and how they moved. Again, the light swept round to the front of the car, and again I saw the driver. The same face. Still, apparently, looking forward to it. The light passed on round, like a lighthouse beam illuminating and then vanishing. It did this another 2 or 3 times. I reckon it must have taken about 15 or 20 seconds to complete each circuit of the Volkswagen's interior. And then, without warning, the light vanished and everything was dark again. But only for a few seconds. The sand dune in front of the Volkswagen lit up, piercingly bright in the darkness, and then off again. And on again, and off again. It took a split second to work out what was happening, but I twigged that the driver was flashing the car's main beams, probably by pulling back on the steering column stalk. Flash, flash. Flash, flash, flash. Maybe half a second on, then off, then on again. Sometimes the light was held for a little longer, a bit like how Morse code is structured. And then, to my abject horror, the sky started to flash, seemingly by way of response. I don't mean the whole sky lit up, as when there's a lightning storm. But there were lights in the sky, and they looked like stars. Small pinpricks of light against the blackness. Maybe they'd been there all along, and I just thought they were stars, even though, as I said, it had been overcast for much of the day. But, after the Volkswagen had flashes its headlights. These stars, these multiple points of light, stretching right out over the bay, blinked off, and on, and off, and on again. Then the Volkswagen flashes its lights again, in a pattern similar to before. I don't know if it was the same sequence, but there was on and off, and sometimes the beam was held on for longer, and sometimes it was darker for a little longer. And then the lights in the sky responded, or so it seemed. Again, this is more difficult to explain than it was to see. There was nothing of substance visible in the sky. Nothing solid, nothing with a shape. But it was like a net of lights, seemingly physically unconnected, but which blinked on and off simultaneously, and which seemed to be communicating with the Volkswagen parked a bare 10 paces away from me. The lights were out over the bay, they weren't over the land, and they weren't directly over my head. I had a sense they were up high, though, and that they were part of something massive. That they went on for miles, largely invisible, but massive. But I didn't know what, and I didn't have any frame of reference for this. The exchange between the car and the sky, such as it was, went on for about 2 or 3 minutes. It's hard to recall. The messages weren't lengthy, so don't get confused that it was actual Morse code, which I don't know, by the way. There were maybe only 6 or 7 flashes each time, of varying durations. Then the lights in the sky vanished and, without warning, the Volkswagen's engine cranked and started. I pulled away and sat with my back to my car, facing the other way, as I heard the Volkswagen back away from the dune, pause, then wheel round and make its way back up the laneway to the main road. I heard it accelerate out and drive off into the night, the engine noise soon lost to the wind. I sat there for a few moments, trying frantically to process what I'd just witnessed, before crawling back over to the tent and clambering back inside, zipping up the door behind me. Inside, there was a palpable tension. Claire had been very, very concerned that something bad was happening to me and had, according to Becca, been praying the whole time I'd been outside. I couldn't find the words to even begin to explain what had just occurred. Yet I also didn't feel that we were in any specific danger. My overriding feeling about the whole thing was that I had just witnessed something that I absolutely shouldn't have seen, but also that the participants had been somehow aware of my presence, and had pressed on regardless. Because who was I, and what could I do about it? So I just swallowed, and said I was fine, and that there'd been a fella on his own in a car but he was away now. What else could I tell them? I didn't sleep at all that night. I just lay there, staring at the polyester ceiling of the tent, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Of course, I couldn't. It didn't make any sense. Was it some joker in a mask? Unlikely. There'd been no effort to approach us, and no bunch of mates to impress. How would that explain the lights in the sky? Did the flashing of the car headlights interrupt my eye's perception of the light and make me think that the stars were flashing on and off? No, because the patterns were noticeably different, and after the car had driven off there were no stars visible in the sky. Round and round my thoughts swirled. It was a long night, and even after dawn started to filter in through the walls, I still just lay there. The others began to stir about 8 a.m. or so, and I felt absolutely destroyed. We'd bought eggs and bacon from the shop the night before and kept them wrapped in the cooler box, but I didn't much feel like anything beyond coffee. I decided I couldn't mention it to them. So, I never did. They still don't know. We're no longer in touch. Anyway, life took us to different parts of the world, and some are still there, to the best of my knowledge. I tried to write all this down several times in the past, but each time something stopped me from doing so, like, physically prevented me. The digital text or physical paper copy would go missing, and I developed a sort of phobia of telling this tale, like it was the account that must be kept secret. That someone was monitoring me to make sure it didn't get out. Ridiculous, I know. But I've sat up all night typing out my recollections just to see if this time I can get it out there. I've had limited time to go back over it, so apologies if it doesn't read very well. I'm sure there will be questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. I have photographs of the weekend, but unfortunately none are of the events that took place in the early hours of that Sunday morning. My 35mm camera had been safely locked in the boot of my car overnight. But I'll do my best to scan and upload them, with suitable redactions, as I doubt my companions would wish to be associated with this. I'd marked where we stayed on a paper map, but unfortunately this was lent to another friend and subsequently lost. In the intervening years, I've traveled down to Galway a number of times and driven out along the road between Galway City and Spittal, trying to find that same road again. Trying to find that car parked by the beach. And I never have. In the intervening 23 years, there have been so many changes to the road and housing developments that I can't find any landmarks to guide me. You may believe me in all this, or you may not. But this isn't a leg pull or some effort at a short story. This is what I remember happening to me, and there's not been many days since when it doesn't fit into my mind, however briefly. I've had a few strange things happen to me in my time. But this is the one that still really flummoxes me, and still brings me out in a chill to dwell on it at any length. There are so many elements to it that I still don't know quite what occurred, or what I saw.
Here are some photos excerpted from the Google Maps sidebar, annotated to roughly indicate the line of sight from the car park, more specifically, along the path down onto the beach. The arrows I've added illustrate the line of sight along the beach path, and they're correlated with the western end of the same big rock on the beach.
In this markup, the red area represents where the Golf was parked and the direction it was facing, while the blue area represents where our two cars were parked, facing eastwards towards the grassy area, as per the pic below, where the photographer is facing west. In this pic, the camper in the background is facing directly down onto the beach, in a southerly position. This is not where the Golf was parked. The green area marked is where our tents were pitched, also taken facing west. These pics were taken the next morning. My car hadn't moved. The night before, I had crept out the front of the gray and yellow tent, and moved over to the nearest side of my car to peer around the front end at the side of the Golf. Had the white Golf been still parked up when the above pic was taken, it would have been visible fully side on, and pointing in a southeast direction, into the dunes and not onto the beach. Again, apologies for the somewhat poor rendering, but here's a mock-up. This photo was taken roughly facing east, with the tents and the cars to my back. You can see that the area isn't very flat, with grass-covered hillocks around it. We were effectively camping in a hollow. Looking at the drone photo, this is my estimate of the orientation of the Golf, in red. Looking at the drone photo, the dunes surrounding the parking area look a bit lower. I'm not sure if that's a flattening effect from the angle of the picture, or if there's been erosion in the 23 years since. But my impression at the time was that from the position of the Golf, it couldn't be seen from the shore, or indeed by a watercraft out in Galway Bay. What confuses me about the boat signal theory is that Google shows that there are literally dozens of laneways leading down from the R336 to end with a clear and uninterrupted view of the bay. This particular parking area seems to be one of the few that doesn't allow that clear view. I intend to come back later and go through all the questions one by one. As you'll agree, a phone isn't really the ideal tool for photo editing, and for some reason all the edited pics I took and saved to my cloud drive last night won't download today, so apologies for the incongruous emojis.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.